Hi, good morning, everybody. I was a little bit of waiting because the number of participants on board was not so good today. Now I think more than 20 participants are there, so we can start our session today. As we know that today we are going to discuss a really critical issue, and that is livelihood. And I would say that I would ideally like to take this session at the end of all sessions, because this is encompassing all the issues, because the livelihood issue uh, is not a standalone issue. It is actually a product. The state of livelihood is a product of many other issues, like it is determined by education, it is determined by health, it is determined by the gender equality or inequality in the country, the caste system. So if you see livelihood, or even if you see that it is a product of the market economy, the kind of progress we are making, the democratic structure. So livelihood, in a sense, is a composite state which reflects many other things. And when we'll be discussing livelihood, we'll actually look at that. So today, what we'll do today, I'm not, because livelihood is such a vast issue. Probably will not have time to do the recapitulation as usually I do at every session of the previous sessions. So I will start with livelihood, the session on livelihood. So on this session, what we'll do, we'll try to have a common understanding about the state of livelihood in India, the status, the situation of livelihood of India. While discussing livelihood, as you can understand, we'll have to understand the dynamics of income. We'll have to understand employment status in India. We'll have to understand few sectors like MSME sector. We'll have to understand a little bit of agriculture sector. So once we understand all these sectors, and also with our understanding of education and health, then probably we can draw a canvas of livelihood with all these inputs. So that what we'll try to do is that today we'll try to scan through all these things, as we have already done in education and health. Today we'll pick up income, we'll pick up employment, we'll try to understand the gender discrimination in that, or gender disparity in that. We'll try to understand the agricultural scenario, we'll try to understand the MSME scenario, and then we'll try have an understanding on a livelihood framework. So how do we address, what is the programmatic framework for livelihood strategy? That we'll have a discussion, so that based on our assessment of the livelihood situation in India, then we'll try to develop a perspective, programmatic perspective of livelihood, that how do we approach livelihood. Then we will get into different programs, major programs, what's happening in India. First of all, we'll try to understand that Ministry of Rural Development, what kind of approach they have been taking toward rural transformation. Then we'll have a discussion on national. We'll just reflect through all these things. National Rural Livelihood Mission. Then we'll have a reflection on National Urban Livelihood Mission. Then we'll have a brief on National Skill Development Council. So the objective of today's session is, first of all, to understand livelihood as an issue, and I think that is the most important agenda today. And then the second part is that then how do we address livelihood issue? These are the two main agenda today, and then we will try to reflect on, try to understand what are the programs, ongoing programs the government is implementing at this point of time, so that we can have a kind of comprehensive idea about livelihood. As usually, we'll have a small break after 1 hour, and then at the end we'll have a question and answer session. Now, if you look at the livelihood situation, I would again request to really I will seek your attention to all these points, because these are really very important points to have an understanding about the livelihood situation in India. The Indian economy is going through, as you know, that it is going through quite a bit of a tough period, since the implementation of neoliberal economic policies in 1991. We see that in 2008 and post 2008, there is a kind of drop in GDP. So from 8 to 9% growth, we have come down. Now we are maintaining around 5% growth. So that is a kind of really problem. So that is the overall situation. But at the same time, one of the assumptions, if you see, during that neoliberal economic paradigm, what we thought that there would be a trickle down effect, so that there will be a pull effect, so that if there is a market economy, if there is a progress or development in the market economy, that will have a kind of pulling force, so that the marginalized people will actually have opportunities, increased opportunities to participate in the market economy. But what has happened, that has, we see that actually it is not evidential. We see that the disparity between the marginalized class and the privileged class is day by day widening. So that what we are saying, trickle down theories do not address the legitimate aspirations of the poor and cannot eliminate poverty. So this is a very straightforward and very bold statement. And I must say that this statement was given by our President Pranab Mukherjee in his first speech after becoming president. Then we see that while the Indian economy has grown to 10th largest in the world, you see the disparity. What is the paradox we have? It also accounts for 1/3 of world's poor people, right? And it is now 1/3, and it used to be 1/5. So there is actually an increase of proportion, of number of people, the share of poor people globally in India. So that from 1/5 we have become 1/3, in terms of poor people in India. So that on one hand, the paradox is, on one hand, we have grown and we have become the 10th largest economy in the world. On the other hand, our number of poor people are increasing. So this is the disparity widening gap what we are talking about. As per available data, a little more than 50% of India's population continues to be engaged in agriculture, as we know, which barely accounts for 14% GDP only. So that 50% of our population who are engaged in agricultural activity, they're producing only 14% of our GDP. While less than 30% of the population works in the service sector, which accounts for more than 67 sectors. So again, we see the disparity, different sectoral disparity. So that if you see that, what is the net, contribution of agricultural sector, as they are using the human resource most, or most of the employments are actually being generated in agriculture sector, the net product is actually only 14%. On the other hand, in service sector, only we have 30% of our workforce, and it is producing 67% of our GDP. So on one hand, you need to understand that definitely there is a drop in GDP. We actually, had reached 8-9% growth rate, and then it is at around 5% nowadays we are maintaining. So that is on one hand. On the other hand, we see actually that poor people, probably the proportion of poor people is increasing. That is one disparity. The second disparity, we see that the sectoral disparity. So that if we actually reflect on the economic situation of India and try to understand the livelihood state of India, then we see that there is a glaring evidence of crisis because of the increasing disparity, and also definitely the lowering growth rate. Inequality in access to education is so glaring that HDR 2013, Human Development Rate of 2013, India's education index losses more than 40% of its value once adjusted in the inequality. These have to do with misplaced policy priorities of the government, whatever. So that we see that it is not only in financial term, it is not only income and employment, it is not only the sectoral disparity, we see glaring evidences of disparity in access to social capital like education. It is not only financial capital, it is also the social capital. We will have a discussion that livelihood is not only about financial capital, it is about many other capital, and how do we create all this capital or assets for poor people. Now very quickly, inequality in earning has doubled again in earning, in terms of earning. In India over the last 2 decades, making it the worst performer on this count of all emerging economy. The top 10% of, I seek your attention to this. The top 10% of wage earners now make 12 times more than the bottom 10%. So that if you see that the top 10%, the first 10% who are actually the earning the most, their earning 12 times more than the bottom 10%. So, this is what the kind of disparity we see. The Forbes list of billionaires featured 55 Indians in 2013. Now it must have increased a little bit. Strikingly, when the HDI is adjusted for inequality, and every second malnourished child in the world is also an Indian. That is another paradox. On one side, we have increasing number of high net worth individuals, and that to billionaires. But at the same time, we have seen when we were discussing about the health sector that every second malnourished child is in India globally. There in total 7 states. We know these 7 states are actually contributing the highest in the kind of disparity and the financial, the economic, drawback in India. These 5 states are Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh. Now we see a regional skewedness of income and distribution. So this is again, we need to understand that if we see disparity, it is a regional disparity, right? So we see that there is a regional skewedness around 7 states in India. The poverty or the livelihood situation is in the worst form. Now individual income, this is again a statistical measure. As you know, most of you might be knowing that according to Gini index, consistently rising in India, and it is at 39.9% in 2011. So it's quite a bit of high Gini index, and it actually shows the inequality of Indian growth. So that we see that on one hand, though there is a kind of drop in the growth rate post 2008, but we see that wealth accumulation has increased, so that fewer people having a larger portion of the wealth, and the larger people proportion of the people, they are getting the fewer amount of wealth, and that widening gap is one of the really biggest challenge in Indian economy and the livelihood situation in India. And we saw that disparity is not about income, it is about employment, it is about social capitals like education and all. It is about regional skewedness, so that between regions there are disparities. So that disparity, this paradox, is probably the main character of Indian economy and Indian society. And we are today talking about that disparity and try to see that how to bridge that gap through livelihood strategies. Again, few more things. I think we already we understand, it is established that there is a kind of disparity, and it's increasing. The disparity is increasing day by day. Now what we'll do is that we'll very quickly go through some of the parameters of livelihood. Now if you see that extreme poverty rate, we are actually now taking up the parameter of income. I don't know if I can get a pointer from here. Yeah, I think it is there. Okay. Now, if you see the disparity, now this is actually Indian. scenario. Now this Indian scenario, if you see that through the years, this is 1981, this is 1981, this is 1990, this is 1999, and this is 2010. Now we are still at a 33% rate of extreme poverty. So that 33% of our population are still below poverty line, still in below poverty line. Now these below poverty line, what we are talking about, we are referring to a World Bank data. So World Bank data is not referring to our all this kind of definition of poverty. What we are having a lot of debate about definition of poverty in India. They are taking actually $1.25 a day. That is the kind of per capita income. So if it is what the 33% is showing, that it is below $1.25. So it is actually, we cannot challenge this. And this is actually the globally, all these things, all these data, the basis of this data, statistics is $1.25. So that, we don't have, we cannot challenge. It's a kind of proportion we can see that, what is the proportion of Indian extreme poverty rate. Now, at the same time, what you can see that in some of the countries, if you look at our neighborhood, China. In China, it is at 12%. In the, East Asia Pacific, it is 13%, except China. It is excluding China. Then, if you see in the developing world, in all total, it is 21. So that we see that we are still at 33%, and in all other region, it is actually much lower than us. So that is one, that income wise we see that this is a kind of situation. And if you look at the proportion of poor people, this orange, this particular thing is actually Indian proportion, this 400. So that if we can see that 400 million people still are extremely poor condition in India, financial poverty we are talking about now. Comparing to other regions, if you see what are the situation in the other regions, 414, this is the Sub-Saharan Africa. We are just behind, Sub-Saharan Africa. If you see that, this is China, 156. Yeah, so we are much more than China, in terms of number of poor people in India. And if you look at Europe and Central Asia, if you look at Latin America, Caribbean. So if you look at, say, Europe and Central Asia, just to compare, it does not appear here. It is somewhere. This is where it is. One green between that 32 and 400. So it you cannot actually put a number in that. So that is the kind of situation if you compare the Indian poverty situation in other with other regions. So that we are just behind Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa actually contributes 414 million poor people, and we are contributing 400 million poor people in the global poverty demography. The regional share of the world's extreme poor population, again if you see that this is India, this is the share 33%. So that extreme poor in global scenario, 33% of the global scenario of extreme poor people, our contribution is 33% globally in 2010. This is the 2010 data. Again, if you compare it with Sub-Saharan Africa, they are 34% and we are just behind them, 33%. But at the same time, we have 55 plus billionaires in this country. So that is the kind of disparity we are talking about, and that is the kind of livelihood situation we are talking about. So what we are now looking at, we are looking at the income parameter to understand the livelihood situation in India. The good news is that number of extremely poor people is decreasing, is in decrease in India and in other countries also. But the rate is not, as high as China and many other countries. If you look at this, this is India, in fact. We are actually reduced. But if you look at this Chinese, curve, this is the China curve. if you look at this curve, the way it has actually reduced, if you see this, the declination, the way it has declined, the rate is much higher than India. But the good news is that we are, though in a slow rate, but we are actually also the trend is a declining trend. Now, this is what we talked about, the income disparity. We saw that we are actually the second largest home for poor people globally. We saw that there is a trend that the number of poor people is decreasing. Whether we talk about this parameter or that parameter of extremely poor people or below poverty line, actually the number is decreasing. But at the same time, we see that the rate of declination is little slow. Now, if you take up another parameter as the workforce, again, we'll go through very quickly to this. The alarming scenario in 2011, 2012, if you compare with 1993, 94 with 2011 and 2012, let us forget about all the other years. In terms of rural male population, workforce was 55.3%. This is what it is, right? What is happening in 2011-12? This is decreasing to 54.3. So that the ratio of workforce to population has decreased through the years from 1993-94 to 2011-2012. So that workforce, the proportion, the ratio of workforce is decreasing in case of rural men. In case of rural female, let us look at the next thing. Next row, 32.8. This is also decreased to 24.8. Yeah, we had quite a bit of unemployment decade. Urban female, this is the only hope we see, that in terms of urban male workforce, it has increased little bit from 52 to 54.6%. So this is what our livelihood challenge. If you see that the rural male female, the workforce ratio has decreased. In terms of urban male, it has little bit of increased. In terms of again urban female, if you look at say 1993-94 data, it was 15.5 and it has decreased to 14.7. It's not as high, the decrease is not as much as the rural population, rural workforce, but still there is a kind of reduction, there is a kind of declination. Now, what is the takeaway from this? That the total number of, first of all, we see the disparity income wise. So there is a problem that we see that if you take the gross picture at a national level, that probably our GDP has increased, still we are having 5% growth, etc., etc. But we see that the marginalized population is actually the largest number of population is having the fewer wealth, and the wealth is really accumulated in fewer hands. If you look at the trend of employment, we see that actually the ratio of workforce population has reduced, right, from 1993-94 to 2011-2012. So this decade was really a decade of unemployment in India. We could not generate employment. Employment has reduced. I don't know really, how many of us were actually had expected this kind of reduction, and we really do know, all of us, that it has actually the workforce ratio has reduced. Fine. Now, this is again, if you look at the workforce, and you see that if you compare male workforce versus female workforce, what we see is that at some point of time in 2004-2005, this was almost equal, yeah, the share of workforce, male versus female. But after that, it's a widening gap, so that participation of female workers has reduced, much, and the participation of male workers, as we say that in urban setup, actually the male workers has increased, and there might be a lot of migration from rural to urban. So there is a kind of little stagnant scenario, not so much of reduction in totality. You see, in rural population it has reduced, in urban male population it has maintained, it is increased little bit. But in terms of female population across workforce, female workforce across urban and rural area, it has actually reduced. So we see there is a kind of alarming scenario between the female and male workforce. It is increasing. So we know that, if it is livelihood situation, again it is skewed along the gender line. Now, I will not get into so much of detail in this list. Only thing is that did you know that some of the states where actually the work participation ratio has declined. This is what I have highlighted. You see, in Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, in these places, actually, the work participation rate has declined. This is the rural area, and at the same time, this is the urban area where it has declined. In which states? It is Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and Karnataka. So in this particular thing, what is the takeaway? We see that in some of the states it has increased, but in many states, actually the work participation rate has really declined. So that is another major issue what we need to understand, that why it has declined, what kind of opportunities we can create, what kind of skills we can create, what kind of environment we need to create. Those are the livelihood issues we need to discuss and we need to understand. Now, this is something, is a common sense, that you see that, you don't look at all these states. Probably whenever you will get time, you probably look at all these states data. But if you see that all India data, that this last one, if you see that the number of people who are participating in agriculture sector, it's around actually 60%, 40 to, it's more than 50% in fact, around 60% who are participating in agriculture. And we, discussed that though more than 50% of our workforce is participating in agricultural sector, but the total contribution to GDP is really less. Yeah. And if you see that in other sector, in all India scenario, right, the manufacturing sector, this is the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector actually, construction sector and trade, it's almost the same kind of distribution we have. But all these three constitutes around say 40 to 45% of the total workforce. So that only 40 to 45% of our total workforce is participating in the sectors other than agriculture. In agriculture itself, we have more than 50% of our workforce. Let us take this. Yeah, what's the problem? Fine. Now, distribution of rural workers, if you see that in all India, as usually the agriculture would be the highest, definitely that's quite natural in rural sector. In manufacturing, construction and trade, this is again, and we see a very small number of people. We will get into that little more detail. Now, share of cultivators, again we don't have to get into all these data. I will just take you to the aggregation. Now we see that share of cultivation in cultivators in workers has actually reduced by the time, you see, through the years, 38.7, 31.7, 24.6, so that we see that number of people who are, though it is the biggest participating area for workforce, agriculture, but the number of cultivators has reduced, since 1991 to 2011, in one decade, we see that 30.8% to 24.6%. Yeah. So that is another trend we need to understand. So that in agriculture sector also it is reducing, but at the same time, if you see that it is still maintaining a higher proportion than the other sectors, so that the other sectors growth rate in terms of work participation is really, really bad. It is slower than even, it is, workforce participation wise, it is actually worse than even the agriculture sector. That is the kind of situation at a total, in totality if we see. Again, area under marginal operation holding, the cultivators who are having small amount of land, they are the marginal holders. And if we see the total number of, total area of land under marginal holding, that is also generally reducing. This is another one interesting trend I will actually take you through. See, if you take example of Odisha, the first one, it was 1,064,000 hectares. In 2010-11, it has become 1,922. So that it is reducing. It is increasing. The holding, the amount of size of land under marginal operation has increased from 1,064 to 1,922,000 hectares. So it is increasing, and the increase is by 80%. Now, why it has happened? Why the size of land under marginal operation of small farmers, marginal farmers, in small lands they do the agricultural activities. Why the total land has increased? Because it is being fragmented. So that in a joint family we had land holding, a bigger land, then our families are being splitted, so that the small families, the nuclear families have smaller lands, then increase of family members, increase of population, the share is becoming smaller and smaller. So that if you see that the amount of agricultural activity people do, the size of land available to to these families and these individuals for agricultural activity is reducing. But if you look at in some of the other areas, that is all India, generally that is the kind of scenario, and that is what we understand. But if you look at these 4-5 states, like it starts from Kerala, and you have here Haryana, Punjab. Kerala, Haryana and Punjab. In these three cases, you see that the change percent is in negative. So that what has become? The size of marginal holding, the total size of land where the marginal farmers are doing their cultivation has reduced. And the question is that why? Unless the other places, Kerala, Haryana and Punjab, what is my interpretation, my assessment is that we had huge agricultural revolutions. The productivity has increased in 3 of these states, and at the same time what has happened is all these agricultural activities have become very capital intensive. So that now in Punjab, Haryana, Kerala, if you go, you see that they are using a lot of equipment, they are using chemical fertilizer. The inputs, the industrial input has actually increased a lot. So that what has become is, for the small and marginal farmers, it has become really, it is not feasible, it is not viable to do cultivation, because without that kind of industrial input, and with that kind of industrial input, they definitely cannot maintain or continue with the agricultural activity. So what is happening is that most of these cultivators actually leaving their agricultural profession, occupation, and they're doing something else, right? And the bigger farmers are becoming, acquiring more and more land from the smaller farmers, and they actually, the land is going to the fewer hands. So that agriculture has become more capital intensive, industrial input intensive, and at the same time what is happening is that the marginal farmers, they find it really difficult to maintain their agricultural activities because they don't have that kind of capital. So that what they are doing is that they are actually selling out their lands, and the bigger farmers are actually acquiring more and more lands. So we see a negative growth here in this camp, so that it has reduced the size of the land where the marginal farmers are cultivating, it has reduced. So it is actually becoming probably it has gone to the bigger farmers' hands. Now, again, we don't have to go to the all of this data. What we'll see that all India scenario, if you see, it's almost the same kind of trend state-wise we see. All India data, if we see that the GSDP, the gross, state development, domestic product has actually, from agricultural sector has reduced. In this scenario, you see that it was 16.04 and it is reduced to 12.02, right? If you see that GSDP of manufacturing and service, it has actually 15.70. We don't have the previous year's data, but if we see at least the share, and the service industry alone has GSDP of 58.39. But at the same time, we saw that only around 30% of our population is actually participating, workforce, not population, workforce is participating in service sector only. So that in agriculture sector, it is 16.04. In 2012, it is actually 12.02, and we saw that actually more than 50% of our population, of our workforce is participating in agriculture, and the GSDP is 12.02. At the same time, 30% of our workforce is participating in services, the last one, and the GSDP is 58.39. So that is another livelihood challenge we have in India. So that the sector where more people are working, productivity of that sector in terms of domestic product has decreased, is lower than the sectors where actually lower number of people are participating, like service sector. So this is another disparity, and this is another livelihood challenge we have. So till now what we discussed is that we try to understand the income scenario, in terms of poverty. What is the kind of income scenario in India? We saw that there is a kind of disparity, gender-wise disparity. We saw that the wealth is getting more and more accumulated. We try to understand the dynamics of workforce, employment dynamics in India, and we saw that male-female participation, the disparity is widening. We saw that actually the workforce population, this is a big concern. Ratio of workforce population is reducing in case of rural male, rural female, and urban female. In case of only urban male, it has increased marginally, right? So that we see that actually total workforce participation has reduced. That means last decade was a really bad decade for creating job in India, and we could not create jobs for enough number of people. So that lower number of people actually proportionately has had the opportunity to participate in different occupations. We saw that in case of participation rate, work participation rate in some of the countries actually has reduced, right? It has in major states, participation rate in rural males, and we see that rural female in Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, in Tamil Nadu, the rural males work participation has reduced, and in few states like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and Karnataka, it has reduced. So that means this reduced work participation rate of these few states of male or female wise has actually contributed to this, the ratio of workforce population. That is why in rural, male, rural female, and urban female, the actually workforce has reduced. Now you see that as we discussed that more than 50% of our population is still participating in agricultural sector, though our productivity is around say 12 to 13% of this in terms of proportion of GSDP. We understand that in few states, interestingly, we see that size of the land where actually the marginal operation has reduced in contrary to the other places where actually because of the fragmentation, land size, land holding size has reduced. In Kerala, Haryana and Punjab, these three states, we see that actually the marginal farmers, the size of total land where marginal farmers are cultivating, that has reduced. So it might be, as I said, it's because of the highly capital intensive agriculture. The smaller farmers could not cope up with the new situation, and they had to leave, agriculture and to migrate to any other occupation, or has become probably in many cases unemployed. Share of GSDP we have discussed. Now let us get into the MSME. If you see that in those states where the first of all in this particular table, again don't have to go to all this complicated data. Just pick up one and try to understand. Just see Uttar Pradesh. If you see, this is the registered sector MSME, number of MSMEs. This is in lakhs, so that 1.9 lakhs MSMEs were there who were registered. Unregistered MSMEs 42.2 in unregistered sector, 42.2 lakhs, right? So that unregistered informal sector is much higher. It's around say 40% or little less than 40%, yeah, of the registered sector. Now, in terms of employment, in registered sector, we have only 7.6 lakhs in UP. Yeah. In unregistered sector, we have 84.8, right? So that the share of unregistered sector was 14.0 in total population, total worker in fact. It's not only MSME, total worker I am saying. In MSME, agriculture and all including, it would be 14.0%. So that what we see is that the trend in Indian scenario is, first of all, in informal, unregistered, small businesses, micro businesses, actually the participation, more and more people are participating. In terms of registered sector, actually the organizations, the businesses are very few, and also in comparison to the unregistered sector definitely, and also the rate of employment in the registered sector is very few. Now let us look at the Indian scenario. In unregistered sector, we have 15.64 lakhs of MSMEs. It is 2004-2005 data. Unregistered sector, we have 346.12 lakhs. And if you look at employment in unregistered informal sector, we have 93.09 lakhs, while in the unregistered and in the registered and formal sector we have 93.09, and in unregistered sector we have 712.16 lakhs. So that we see that in most of the cases what we could do is that, most of our people in participating were even the MSMEs, they're participating in MSMEs, they're actually participating in mostly the unregistered informal sector MSMEs. Now, when we talk about livelihood, definitely those parameters are important. One is that, as we understand, income is important. We understand the employment is important. We understand participation in the primary sector in India. Primary sector is agriculture. We need to understand that in any country, if we really want to understand the livelihood situation, we see that what is the primary sector. So we saw that agriculture is the primary sector. What is the kind of productivity of the primary sector? How many people are engaged in the primary sector? What is the kind of disparity between or equality between male and female? Those are the parameters definitely is important. But one of the most important parameter for livelihood, if we really want to understand the livelihood situation, is the Human Development Index. So it is, livelihood is not only about the income, it is also about the access to knowledge or acquiring knowledge in terms of education and knowledge, so that skill development. So that is also a very important parameter. And the third parameter is health. So that if we take income, health and knowledge acquisition, the composite parameter out of these three, which actually reflects the livelihood situation in India, in any country or any population, is that then we'll have to look at HDI ranking, Human Development Index. So this is a kind of composite reflection of livelihood situation. It's not only about money, it is about the standard of life in terms of knowledge acquisition, and in terms of health also. So in that case, this is a kind of statewide scenario we need to understand. Kerala, stands first, then Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Uttarakhand, Gujarat, West Bengal, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Assam. And as we discussed in many cases, that these are the states, you see 7 states, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Jharkhand, MP, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Odisha. These are the states actually contributing to the crisis of livelihood more and more. And it is skewed around these states so that we can understand that, where we need to focus on, right? If you look at a macro level. Now with that, what we'll do is we'll take a small break. Okay, now we have 2 more slides. I think let us actually quickly go through 2 slides and then we'll take a quick break. Now, if you look, broadly, if you try to understand that what are the demographic sections, or the segments, population segments, who are facing livelihood challenges. If you try to understand that, who are those segments? One is that forest dwellers, the tribal population, indigenous population mostly, and also non-indigenous, scheduled caste populations are also there in many forest areas. There are 93 million. Before that, sorry, I missed on BPL, below poverty line, 23.7% of rural population. Again, whatever the parameter you take, whatever the BPL rate you take, it's quite a bit of high number, right? That there is no argue about that. There is no debate about that. In terms of $1.25 a day, if we take that parameter, the World Bank parameter, it is around 33% of Indian population below that. So that, the BPL definitely they are facing livelihood challenges. If you take that parameter, 33% of our population in all India. Forest dwellers, 99 million. Landless farmers, 10 to 20 million. Street vendors, 10 to 12 million. And please, note that all these numbers are increasing. Are all in increase, so that we need to understand that it is not that we have a declining trend, we have a really increasing trend. Manual scavengers, probably this particular thing is declining slowly. Still, it's a shame that we have 1 million manual scavengers in India. Single women, 25.9 million. Women farmers, 90 million. We saw that actually, these women's participation rate in workforce is reducing day by day, and this gap is widening. So it is really an alarming situation. Disabled persons, 21 million. Seasonal and casual workers in informal sector or informal jobs in formal sector, 140 million, 21% of the total workforce. As I discussed that in informal sector, the unregistered MSMEs, we have our majority of workforce who are participating in that. There are seasonal workers, casual workers. So 21% of the total workforce is actually participating in that. Urban and rural altogether. Vulnerable workers, as per ILO definitions, 80 million. Vulnerable workers means, their income wise vulnerable, their health wise vulnerable, there might be occupational hazards, they don't have any safety and security. So those vulnerable, workers are 80 million. Now some of these figures are overlapping, like, if you take single women, they might be, many of them are vulnerable workers. There might be, forest dwellers who are also in landless families, right? So that there would be a kind of overlapping in the statistics, so it does not add up to 100%, and it should not. But this estimation is important to understand the quantum of problem and try to understand what are the target, pockets or population segments in terms of livelihood challenges. Now, another thing what we talk about very, very often nowadays, that our demography is actually a capital. It's demographic dividend we talk about, right? So first of all, India has the youngest population in the world today. and as we understand, so till about the years up to 2050, so we'll have the youngest population. We have the most number of productive population in India globally. By the year 2020, India will have about 325 million people in the age group of 20 to 35 years, constituting 25% of our population. So that 25% of our population will be in 20 to 35. That's a great strength, as you can understand. That is the most productive age, and 1/4 of our population would be in that particular productive age. In comparison to China, China will have about 308 million people in the same age group, constitution 21%. So that we have 25%, they will have 21%. India will have surplus human resource of 47 million by year 2020. We have surplus, so that after meeting our requirement, we have 47 million. And if we really consider this is actually a resource, then it is a huge potential for India. So what we are saying, against a global human resource shortage of 39 million, so if you see the resource shortage is 39 million, yeah, and we will have 47 million surplus. This translates into a huge opportunity for India. In fact, India has the capability to create up to 36 million new direct jobs and opportunities to create many more indirect jobs. So this is the kind of situation. We have really a great opportunity in terms of a population. But the scenario is, very quickly I go through that, only 5% of India's labor force in the age group of 20 to 24 has received vocational training. 67% of the workers either illiterate or semi-literate. The educated and without professional skills, educated but without professional skills, on the other hand, constitute 69% of the total unemployed. 93% of the total workforce is engaged in unorganized informal sector and produces 60% of India's GDP. An estimated 31% of the 397 million worker population lives in below poverty line. So 31% of our workers are actually below poverty line. Over 200 million students enroll for schools in class 1 each year, but only 20 million. See, out of 200 million students who are enrolling in standard 1, class 1 each year, only 20 million are able to finish class 12. So it drops 90%. So only 10% go through class 12. Yeah. Only 2.5 to 3 million vocational education and training places are available in India. So that all along, we looked at income, we looked at employment, we looked at agriculture scenario, we looked at MSME, we looked at the demographic dividends, we looked at the HDIs. As to understand the livelihood scenario in India through different parameters, we see it's actually a land of our country is a home of paradox. At one hand, we have number of billionaires, number of high net worth individual is increasing. On the other hand, extreme poverty, though the number is decreasing of extreme poverty, poor people, but at the same time, we constitute 33% of world's, poor population. So that the paradox remains, the main concern is not about the gross product, not about the per capita, when we look at macro level, but we see that the disparity, the distribution, we see that Gini coefficient is still very high. The distribution and disparity is really, remains as concern. With that, after a 5 minutes break, we will start discussing on the livelihood framework, the programmatic framework. So it's already 12 o'clock, so we'll come back at 12:05. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think you all are back from the break. I know today we are discussing a lot of numbers, statistics, and data. But again, I really think that it's not that complex. It's not that complicated. Just you know, it is just to understand the situation, and this is all about human lives. So that it is not about only these numbers. So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to go through these numbers, go through these graphs, and try to understand, having an impression of the situation. And as I discussed, I repeated number of times. It's that uh, the takeaway of today's till now what we have discussed, the state of the livelihood situation in India is actually lies on that paradox that income wise we have a paradox, employment wise we have a paradox. We see that the work participation rate is reducing. We see that there's a disparity between male and female in terms of income, in terms of employment. We see that most of our workforces is participating in the informal sector, unorganized sector. We see that agriculture sector is overburdened with workforce, but the net productivity is much, contribution to the GDP is actually much lower. So that we'll have to look at the agricultural sector. We'll have to see that what kind of job creation we can do, what kind of income generation we can do, what are the livelihood strategies will actually address the issues of gender disparity. So those are the things, those are the questions we need to actually generate in our mind. So that is the thought process we'll have to initiate in our mind. And that is why we went through all these numbers and all these things. But at the same time, I would request you that whenever you get time, and we'll be sharing again as usually these PowerPoints with you, whenever you get time, please go through these numbers slide by slide and try to understand what is the kind of trend. And broadly we have discussed, but at the same time we can get more. We can disaggregate all these statistics by state, by different parameters through these slides, and you can see that what is the state. And with that, when you approach livelihood, then we see it's a different approach definitely we'll take, because then we understand that what are the nitty-gritties, what are the the situation, exact situation on ground, and based on that only we will actually develop our livelihood program approach or the strategy. So, and we also understood the kind of demographic dividend we talk about, what is the kind of disparity is there, is another paradox we have. Now, let us see that, what do we understand in terms of the livelihood framework. When we talk about, so this is a kind of scenario. We see that, definitely there's a requirement of effective strategies, approaches, programs, and initiative from private and government sector to address this kind of situation, because, number one, as business community, what we need to understand, one, is that what we thought that the benefits, achieved by the neoliberal, economy, the open market economy, is not really being distributed, is not trickled down to the marginalized class. What we thought it will happen automatically. There will be a kind of pull force. So that we see we need a kind of push force at the marginal, at that grassroots level, at that bottom of the pyramid level. So that it is not only the market pull, it is also the community push that we'll have to create, so that we can actually minimize the gap between the privileged and underprivileged. But how do we do that? What kind of program approach and strategies we should have? What kind of program framework we should have? That we need to understand, and then we will get into the existing program discussion on the existing programs and all. Now, I will request you to really, concentrate a little bit, and, I will take you through this, and, we'll have to have a kind of, common understanding about this framework, so that this is a comprehensive framework. The program, actual program in components based on the local situations, based on the assessment, based on your assessment of that particular area, the opportunities, the threats and risks, that definitely will change little bit. The broad framework when we approach livelihood issues is this. Now let us start with the left one, this particular box, right? Now you see that in this we are talking about the context, so that when we talk about any family, any community, we have a particular context. So we have some natural resources, we have some institutions that might be traditional institutions, that might be new institutions. Traditional institutions, that in our villages, even family is an institution. We had strong community sense. We had actually a village wise, there would be a village head and all these kind of things. These systems we had already traditional. So these traditional institutions there. The new democratic panchayati raj, self-help group, the government institutions, those are the new institutions there might be. We have infrastructure, whether bad or good infrastructure, there is an infrastructure context here. So there is a history, there is an economic, cultural and political environment, there is a demography. So this is, first of all, we need to understand the context when we talk about a particular livelihood situation. So, these are, again, this is not a full list, these are indicative, then you get a lot more elements in that particular area. What happens? We all have these contexts. Sometimes what happens, if you see that there is a kind of star mark in that, we have shocks and stresses. So what happens, say, for example, see in this particular area, a small farmer's family living, probably with their own difficulties and other things, but still they're pulling on, they're managing, right? All of a sudden there is a flood situation. What happens? That shock, that stress. So that immediately impacts the natural resources, what we talked about. That immediately impact institutions, infrastructure, their economy, yeah. And so that when we talk about a context, we'll have to talk about the context with all these assets, what they have, the natural resources, etc., etc. At the same time, we'll have to talk about the risks, existing risks. Like, if we talk about our Eastern India, every year we have flood situation. So that when we talk about a livelihood situation there, probably they have the most fertile land they might be having very strong institution, but at the same time, if you don't factor in the risk factors, when you are doing an assessment trying to understand that particular livelihood situation, then definitely, whatever you do in one flood situation, everything will be collapsed, right? Now, with that context, what we do is that we understand that context, we try to develop some kind of livelihood strategy, right? And then there are particular livelihood outcomes. So what are the outcomes, broad outcomes? If you see the right side box, this one, yeah. What are the broad outcomes we see? Security of food, nutrition, health, water, shelter, education, community participation, personal safety. So it is not about only income, it is not about only employment, it is about a comprehensive, asset to that particular individual or the family or to the community, right? Like food, nutrition, health, water, shelter, education, community. There are two angles. One is that we know there is a vicious cycle of poverty. So that, bad health, poor income, low nutrition, bad health. It goes back to bad health. Again, bad health. Again, low income, because they might actually lose a lot of working days because of the bad health. They cannot participate productively in the workforce and all. Again, low income. Again, lower, nutritional status, more infections, bad health. So that, if you take health, education and all these things, these are actually very, very integral part of the, livelihood elements, livelihood status. So that, again, as we discussed that, that is why we need to take care of, we need to understand the human development index. It is not only income and employment, it is about their access to education, knowledge, it is about their health, it is about their income, everything, all encompassing a comprehensive status. A product of all these factors is the livelihood status, right? Sometimes what happens that people actually very narrowly look at livelihood and they think that it is only about generating income and employment. Yeah. It is also about the intra-household, disparities, like a very, very, when you are actually talking about livelihood in a particular family, if you see that, we have already seen, you have gone through all these, data and saw that there is a huge gender gap, right, in workforces, male versus female. So that it is not about increasing, so that at a macro level, at a national level, at a meso level, we see that there is an increase of income, definitely reduction of absolute number of the extremely poor people. But at the same time, we see that disparity is widening, so that it is not about generating income. It is also about how do you create that kind of equitable situation. How do you reduce that disparity at a micro, meso, and macro level? So that is the kind of challenge we have. So that what we are talking about, it is about food, about nutrition, about health, about water, about shelter, about education, about community participation, about personal safety. So whenever you are taking a livelihood approach, whenever you are developing a livelihood program in a particular area, definitely the program should actually integrate all these elements, directly or indirectly. There might be a very good school, a government school is functioning so that you don't have to work on the education sector, but you cannot really miss out that particular factor, and assume that everything is happening so that only income will actually bring in the change. It's not. Okay. Now, again, if I go back to the diagram, we have a particular context, we have livelihood strategy, to impact that particular context, and through that we have enhanced, food security, nutrition, etc., this status. Now, ultimately, what do we want to do? We want to create assets, yeah, for the particular community or for particular, family. Now, what are the assets we have? We have natural capitals, right? Agricultural resources, forest produces, mining, all these are the natural capital we have. Human capital, what are the human capital we create? Livelihood capabilities, it might be skill, it might be knowledge, it might be, a particular traditional, art. So those are the human capital, yeah. Then we have social capital. It might be, the entitlement issues, like, what kind of support they get from the government. It might be their access to education. It might be their access to finance. It is not finance, it is not per se money, but whether they have access to that institution or not, that is a social capital. Whether they have a group, a traditional group or not, whether they have self-help group or not, those are the social capital. And the economic capital. What are those economic capitals? Financial and other stores and resources, right? So that when we actually look at livelihood, then we, through effective strategy, what we want to do is that in a particular context, we identify all these assets, what they have already, the capitals, and we try to enhance that. So that, as usually what happens, that, if I have enough capital, right, if you take example of financial capital, then definitely in our bad time, I can afford to actually, have good health facilities, have good food. At the same time, if I have a good, institutional setup, if I have good natural resources, so all these things, will contribute to the livelihood status of that particular family or particular community. Now, when we talk about livelihood strategy, precisely what we try to do is that, first of all, to understand the context, yeah, those elements, and also in terms of those capitals that, one particular community, but, all these capitals we'll have to assess and try to understand. And then we'll have to see that through our strategy, how do we enhance, those assets of the capitals, and that will have impact on the production and income and activities, consumption activities, processing, exchange, marketing, etc., and will have a comprehensive, impact on the family. So, to summarize, we live in a particular context. We have a set of capitals, yeah, through our livelihood strategies, and the set of capitals is not only we are talking about financial and economic capitals. It is not only instrumental. There are emotive capitals, there are social capitals, there are family, there are human capital. We need to take understand that. For example, in one particular village, if you have a self-help group, a group of women, say, if you have a self-help group, then definitely they have a bigger social capital than unorganized group of women, right? So that we look at creating those capitals within that particular community, within that particular family, and our assumption is that by enhancing that, that means skill development, when you talk about human capitals, entrepreneurship development, employability development, agricultural skill development, there could be a lot of other things, natural capital, definitely, if you see that, how to actually optimize the natural capital, or, make use of the natural capital responsibly though. Social capitals, what kind of entitlement issues, what kind of government supports, what kind of access they have, yeah, if we can influence that. If we have economic capitals, yeah, we can generate economic capitals, then only we can actually impact the livelihood status of that particular community or the family. So that when we talk about livelihood strategies, we talk about a comprehensive strategy. In many cases I see, and that's really a very unfortunate situation, that those programs, they go to develop the programs, people go to develop a program blindfolded. They don't look at all these, aspects, and they think that in isolation, only if we look at the financial, aspects, that will actually enhance the livelihood situation of that family. Now, even if you want to do that, as I said, that, you are working with, say, for example, an artisan family, and you are trying to actually enhance their skill, contemporary skill, marketing skill, production skill, and try to see that, what kind of contemporary product they can develop with their traditional skill, etc. And you only focusing on, say, financial and instrumental skill sets or the components, right? But if you don't look at their health status, if that particular family, in that particular family, the main artisan is actually having, some health problem, or the family has a health problem, the family don't have access to education and other things, definitely you cannot optimize the impact of your program. You develop everything, there is a kind of health problem in the family, everything will collapse. Again, you will have to, start. So that when we approach toward these programs, we will have to have a comprehensive approach. Another very important element what we discussed is that we need to understand that what are the risk factors. It's like insurance, right? When we have health problems, you have strong capital, then you can actually have a better safety net, yeah. But when you have, say, risks like flood, even if you develop a lot of capital and all these things, if you don't factor those risk factors, it might be, it's not only natural risk, it might be many other risks. I'm just giving a simple example to you. So what will happen is that whatever will develop, that will be reduced. So that if you see that all these areas where flood, we have distinct flood area, we have distinct cyclone area, we have distinct earthquake area. So in these areas, what happens is that every time, every cycle of these natural calamities, they push them back in terms of their growth and development, or in all aspects, right? So that we need to understand all these aspects so that we can develop a comprehensive approach to our livelihood issues. Now, as we were discussing that if you look at this particular graphics, then you see that the vulnerability context, see, there are two aspects you need to understand. One is the risk aspect, one is the vulnerability aspect. Now what happens is, say, if in the same particular flood situation, again if we give the same example, a person who has who is really a marginal worker or marginal farmer, or one rich person, the same flood will have different impacts on their lives, right? Because the marginal farmer, for them, the same risk, because of their vulnerability, because of their capitals, you see, the marginal farmers, their capital would be less than the richer farmer, right? Rich farmer. Because if we look at those capitals, what we talked about, all these capitals, human capital, natural capital, financial capital, social capital, in terms of all these capitals, if they have less capital, they will have more vulnerability. In the same case, if you have a small bank balance, in bad days, actually we are more vulnerable than a person who has a fat bank balance, right? So that's in the same case, if lower capital, if the person having lower capital, they will have higher risk, higher vulnerability in the same risk situation. So that risk and vulnerability are two different aspects. Risk could be in external, vulnerability is depending on that, capital, how much capital they have, right? In terms of all kind of capitals. So if you look at this first box, right, vulnerability context, you need to understand that what kind of shocks, trends, seasonality, as we said that, it might be drought, it might be flood, it might be, crop seasonality. I have actually, in fact, I have lived with the communities, the tribal communities, where still now you will not probably believe that 3 to 4 months people don't have literally have any food to eat. They are still, in India, there are tribal communities, there are, indigenous communities, they have roots, so those seasonalities, it's very understand, and at those times, actually, if you see that health problems would be higher, nutritional problems would be higher, so that is really, really a bad situation. So everything, really goes against them at that point of time. So that you need to understand that seasonality. Then what we do is that we try to understand the social, these capitals, what we talk about, right? Through that, what we do is that transforming structures and processes. What are the structures? Levels of government, private sectors, those are the structures, and the processes in terms of policies, program, cultures, institutions, those are the processes. Through that, what we do is that we have a livelihood strategy. Through that livelihood strategy, we have already discussed that we expect some of the outcomes. So that, again, the takeaway from this framework is, it is not only the financial aspect. Livelihood does not mean only financial aspect. Livelihood status is a product of many other things. It is financial, it is social, it is health, it is nutrition, it is many other things. So that what we do is that we try to understand a family or a person or a community in a particular context. We need to understand that context in terms of different capitals, what kind of capitals they have, in terms of different risks, in terms external risks and their vulnerabilities. Then what you do is that then you try to impact their situation through different kind of process and structure through your livelihood strategy, and you expect few outcomes out of that, so that you enhance those assets, the capitals, right? Those are the capitals we talked about. Then we understand that a comprehensive approach with all this capital will have a collective impact on the status of that particular person's life or their livelihood status. So this is what the sustainable livelihood framework. Now, why we talk about sustainability? If you cannot reduce the vulnerability, the same risk situation will come. It will not be sustainable. Again, the same kind of problem will happen. When we talk about sustainability, even if it is an enhanced income, if you don't take care of the health situation, again the same kind of vicious cycle they will get into, and definitely the change will not be a sustainable change. But one thing is very clear, that you don't have to, or we don't have to do everything alone, right? There are government programs, so when we design the program, we'll have to take care of the government programs. We need to understand what are the other initiatives that are available, what are the other NGOs are working on, so that we see that, if we can actually optimize the income with all these things, then we assume that what we should do along with other inputs will actually bring us the outcome what we expect. Okay. So this is almost the same thing. What I would say that, we just, this is another little bit of, different approach what DFID has developed. So I will not take time at this point of time to do that. I have another 15 minutes. After that, we'll have question answer session. So now, what we discussed till now, sustainable livelihood framework. Sorry, we first discussed, there is a problem in this particular slide. First we discussed livelihood situation in India, right? And we try to understand through different parameters what exactly is the situation, what is the paradox, what are the kind of disparities, and the trends, most importantly the trends we understood. Then we try to understand that how to approach livelihood in a more comprehensive, sustainable manner. Yeah, that is the second thing what we discussed today. Now what we'll do is that we will actually scan through some of the government programs and approaches. Now I have picked up, there are so many programs, government programs, hundreds of programs are there. I have picked up only few programs. What I thought that it's, in our limited time, probably we should actually at least have a, at least we should glance through. Okay, so now if you see that the approach to rural transformation, what are the major rural challenges identified are untapped emerging opportunities for livelihood, low contribution in GDP. We see that agricultural contribution is so low, but at the same time we have the highest number of workforce, highest size of workforce, larger size of workforce is involved with agriculture. Low productivity in rain-fed agriculture, again productivity problem, inadequate social security system, inadequacy of credit, poverty trap. We are talking about the vicious cycle of poverty, lack of infrastructure, poor delivery mechanism. These are the challenges to really bring about changes in the rural economy. So now from the government scenario, what are the kind of existing programs they have, so that it is assumed that it would be having a kind of comprehensive impact on the status of people's lives. On one hand, if you look at that topmost thing, creation of employment, through Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, National Rural Livelihood Mission, so what kind of employment, income they can create. Then as we discussed that livelihood and all these things are not only about money, employment and income. You see, they are talking about housing with basic amenities through convergence of Indira Awas Yojana, total sanitation campaign. So those are the programs, so that these are all also impacting the livelihood situation. So that, as I said, that if the sanitation condition is really bad, that will get into bad health. So this is a kind of poverty trap we'll have to break, so that we'll have to have more holistic approach toward the problem. Now they are talking about sustainable agriculture and rural connectivity. Yeah. So in this, what they are doing, that trying to impact the agricultural productivity, rural connectivity through different programs. Then they have social protection program. This social protection program is actually basically the social security programs. Though we have not much, but say old age pension, pension to the disabled persons and all these things, those are the social assistance programs. So this is the safety net program we can talk about, right? So whenever you do a community assessment and all these things, one portion of the population, it's very, very difficult, so that you will have to create a safety net for that particular populations, so that, because they are the most vulnerable population, and it's very, very difficult, like with old age, it's really, really difficult, so that you will have to do some kind of safety net program, social security program with them, so that they are protected, their interests and their lives are protected. So that is a kind of safety net program. So it is, again, if you see the government programs, the way it is arranged, employment, housing, sustainable agriculture, rural connectivity, social protection program. So all encompassing, they think that there would be a sustainable rural development. Okay. Now, in the last 11th 5-year plan, if you look at that, the expenditure pattern of different livelihood or rural development or urban development programs, what the government has spent, the biggest amount of money, the largest amount of money is spent in NREGA, that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now we know that we know that through this program, we are supposed to actually generate 100 days work for those workless people, jobless people, below poverty level people, and also through that we need to create assets in the villages through panchayats. These are done and all these things. Now, why I wanted to actually show this, that we are spending the highest number of the largest amount of money in this particular program, NREGA. We see that it is generating a lot of income and employment in the villages. But if you see that the real implication of the program, very often we see in the villages that actually first of all, the money is unspent, so that we are not generating that much work and income for people. Second thing is that the work is not done, but the wages are being given. Many a times we see that the rural population, actually, because of the different opportunity costs, and they are getting that 100 days work sitting at home or not doing much of work, probably they are not going for much the external opportunities, the other opportunities also. So to me, I think as a crisis intervention, because still in India we have starvation death, still in India we have in different seasonalities where we see that people are not having any means of livelihood. In those cases, definitely we'll have a crisis intervention. We can have a kind of safety net program through what we can generate employment through government subsidies. It is a subsidized program. But at the same time, in long run, definitely, I personally believe that it's not a sustainable approach. I believe it's not a sustainable approach, because what we are doing is that first of all, it's a subsidized model. Second thing is that sometimes the gram panchayats and in the local authorities, local villages, they don't find what to work on, but still they have that they will have to generate 100 days work. Third is that it might not be adding to the skill, contemporary skill of people, because in most of the cases these are very, very unskilled labor force, so it is not actually enhancing the skill and quality of these people. So that, and definitely many we can go on and on, but what I think, even though the government is spending the highest amount of money for this particular program, I would say that this is a very short-term program, and this might, I know, or we would agree that all of us will agree that in some of the situations, in some of the seasons, these programs are very, very required, very much required. But in long term, definitely it is not a long-term solution for livelihood program, what I personally believe. But government probably does not believe, in contrary to that this is something will But this is a very popular program, definitely. Yeah. Now, I will skip too much on this. So what I'll do is that you see the approach of poverty reduction, what they are trying to do, the government through different government programs, we are trying to generate employment, sustainable livelihood through agriculture, durable assets we want to create. Yeah. So if you know what they are talking about, MG Narega, this is that we are talking about that program. They will create durable assets, village roads and etc. 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 But I don't know how much they have created. Financial inclusion, connecting rural people with banks and systems, that is we are talking about. Innovative technology and best practices. Flexi fund available for the villages for their requirement, entrepreneurship, agricultural requirement, etc. etc. Those are the approaches through different programs, government programs are taken to address the issue of livelihood. Then we see that convergence, so that multi-layer convergence and out level with inter and intra-ministerial programs. So that as we are saying that it should be a kind of more comprehensive approach. So as we know that health department is doing something, education department is doing something, rural development is doing something, Panchayati Raj is doing something. So that what we will have to do is that there should be some convergence point, and there should be to person actually it should come as a package. Women and youth development, vulnerable sections, so participating in scheduled castes, scheduled tribes in all major flagship programs, information technology, transparency. So those are the elements, cutting across elements in different development programs what government is sponsoring. Now, very quickly, what we'll do is that we'll go through the National Rural Livelihood Mission. Definitely, I see that we don't have much time to discuss, but I even don't think that we really need to get into the nitty-gritty of these programs. Just we need to know the broad approaches. So these three programs, what are the three programs? National Rural Livelihood Mission, National Urban Livelihood Mission, National Skill Development Council. NREGA, this Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that is really important to understand. But I thought that this is something probably we have a broader understanding about, most of us. And also I don't think that should be a long-term approach for sustainable livelihood development. So we have skipped that. Okay, now if we look at the National Rural Livelihood Mission, the goal is poverty alleviation. Now in this, without getting into too much of this is the same poverty framework. If we the livelihood framework we discussed, more or less on the basis of that framework, these programs are developed. So if you see that sustainable livelihoods for the rural poor through social mobilizing and institution building. Now this is very important. See, all these programs, if you take about the rural livelihood mission or the urban livelihood mission, they are talking about social mobilization and institution building as a means to livelihood. Yeah, those are the main strategies for livelihood, right? So it is not about, as I said, and we discussed enough on this, that this is not about financial instrumental skills and qualities and capacities of community. It is actually about the social and institutional assets or the capitals. So based on few assumptions, these these programs are developed. They are saying poor have strong desire to come out of poverty, social mobilization and building strong institutions of poor critical for unleashing their capabilities, dedicated and sensitive support structure required to induce social mobilization. What are the salient features? I will not get into details. One is that they have a targeting criteria, that the most vulnerable, how do they target the most vulnerable population. Institution building is a very strong component, capacity building. Then access to credit, financial inclusion, key livelihood promotion. In these two major livelihoods, they are saying that one is agriculture and livestock, because most of the people are actually dependent on that, so that you will have to optimize those sectors, the agriculture sector, livelihood sector, broadly the agriculture sector will have to optimize, so that those are the areas, key livelihood options. Skill development and placement, building pro-poor financial sector, self-employment and micro enterprise development, establishment of RCIT This is Rural Self-Employment Training Institutes, actually, RCT, and their effective functions. So those are the salient features: linkage with PRIs, linkages with NGOs. So, if you look at, again, if we go back to this rural, National Rural Livelihood Mission, we see that it is, first of all, a comprehensive approach. This is the main vehicle for livelihood, promotion from Government of India. And again, it has all kind of components, as we discussed. It's a very, very integrated, holistic approach toward livelihood development. Impact and execution, as usually in India we see, might be a problem. Similarly, we have a national urban livelihood mission. In these also, if you see, the core elements are the same: social mobilization, institution building, financial inclusion, capacity building, convergence, all the same things, but this is actually designed for the urban area. Now, in these, definitely we have also a special approach toward the urban homeless population. Now, one very striking data, probably I must mention, I don't know if I have mentioned it already or not, but 50% of the rural men in today's India, they migrate to urban area in search of work. 50% of rural men. So we need to understand, and this migration is a natural, spontaneous migration. On one side, the rural economy is depleting; on the other side, because of the rapid urbanization. So this is something, irreversible trend. Now, what we need to do is that we need to see that how do we actually accommodate them physically, financially, in all aspect, in those new, the centers of new opportunities, the urban areas. Yeah. Ajivika skill, this is a skill development program. The national skill development program, see what, if you see that in case of urban 4, there are, no, I'll actually skip this. I'll go to NULM. Okay, National Urban Livelihood Mission, what are the main components? If you see that, as I spoke about, social mobilization, capacity building, employment, self-employment, support to urban street vendors, scheme for shelter for the urban homeless. So these are the main components for National Urban Livelihood Mission. There is a city targeting all cities with a population of 100,000 or more as per census in Census of India 2011. All district headquarter towns with population of less than even 100,000 if it is district headquarter towns. For Hill Northeast, very small states may propose cities with a population of less than 100,000, and coverage will be expanded subsequently in phase 2. This is the phase 1. I think, yeah, it is since 2004 it is implemented. Now, let us go to, so all details are there. I'm not getting into all details. You please, save these presentations as a reference materials. In case if you require to refer to these schemes and understand these schemes, you will get it in a very in a convenient format here. In National Skill Development Corporation, first of all, this is a kind of private public-private partnership, PPP mode. So if 51% is private stake and 41% is 51% is private stake and 49% is government stake. It is this commission, actually, National Skill Development Corporation. This is actually a non-profit organization. It is a Section 35 company. And what does it do is that it supports a whole lot of skill development programs. So in terms of financing also, the kind of finance they do is loans, in terms of loans, equity, grants, all kind of supports they give. And they have, I would request you to do one more thing. You go to NSDC site and they have all sector-wise, that's a very good job they have done. They have the sector-wise skill gap analysis, state-wise and sector-wise. So if you are interested to any kind of skill development program, that could be a good basis to plan your program. So with that, I'll stop here and I will see if there is any question. Please feel free. I'll try to answer your question. Okay. Ms. Shova is asking that should a corporate organization adapt the government program to do a livelihood program or drop their own program, taking into consideration all the criteria? No, you first of all, it depends on that particular situation. If you see that if you can strengthen, somehow influence the government program, because in any case that's a larger program you have, and different, they have the comprehensive programs and they have the kind of infrastructure and resources. So first of all, we'll have to see that how do I optimize that. Yeah, then we need to understand that what are the gaps there, then only I will try to put my money, right? So I don't want to really put my money where the government is already spending a lot of resource, or probably could not spend the resource, allocated resource, right? So we'll have to see that how do we optimize those opportunities, and then see what is the gap, and then probably whatever the small amount of money I would have, I would be spending in that. So that I would say that again, it is complementarity and supplementarity are two major principles. I would actually suggest you to develop any kind of programs. Okay, if any other question you have. Okay, we have still another 5 minutes time. So if you have any other question, please let me know. Otherwise, as usually, you can write it to me directly to my email ID, and I will try to answer your question. If I don't know the answer, probably I will try to get the question for you, get the answer for you. Okay, as the future plan, what we'll do is in next session we'll be having a discussion on water sanitation, and I will try to keep that discussion a little brief, so that what we'll do is that quickly we will try to. I don't know, how much time it will take, and once I prepare for that, I will know that. But I will try to save some time so that we can actually very quickly have to recap the main elements, the main things what we have already covered, the themes and the kind of discussions we had. After this water sanitation session in the next week, what we will do is that we will get into more hands-on skills, how to plan a program, how to develop the indicators, how to design a program strategy, what kind of monitoring system should be there, what kind of partnership. So we will get into more management, CSR management skills. Till now what we had, we first of all had a discussion to have a overarching understanding about CSR as a concept. What is CSR? We try to understand, we try to develop a kind of common perspective on that. Then we picked up 4 major issues, so that we have a little bit of understanding around those issues. Based on that, probably we'll have to develop many programs. We picked up health, education, livelihood, and next day we'll be discussing water sanitation. After this phase, we'll directly get into the management skill development, and during that time we'll have to pick up a couple of assignments, each of you, and probably you can have a discussion with me and pick up those assignments, and you will have to develop, work on those things, those assignments. I mean, this is a kind of practice session, so let us also have some practical practices. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I would consider that at this point of time probably there's no question. But as I said that if you have any question at a later stage, if you remember any question you want to ask me, please feel free to write it to me. I will try to answer those questions. So thank you so much. Bye for the day.